Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Starcrest Production Network at sgpn.com. Today we're on day 82, and we're covering Lumen Gentium 45 on the regulation of religious life. We're in the chapter 6 of Lumen Gentium on religious, right? Religious, these here meaning those who have made vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and live in community. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican and frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about the three councils set out religious life and help us preach the kingdom and bring people heavenward, those of us who are religious. And today, we're talking about why the church regulates religious life and how it's designed to raise up religious. So there are three subparagraphs of paragraph 45, and A is about the need for church authorities to regulate religious vows and charisms. B is about the different levels of authority between like a bishop versus the pope and things like that. And even the higher authority can reach in. And then the idea of the profession, like the vows being raised up by the church, is paragraph C. So let's start with 45A. It is a duty of the ecclesiastical hierarchy to regulate the practice of the evangelical councils by law, since it is the duty of the same hierarchy to care for the people of God and to lead them to most fruitful pastures. The importance of the profession of the evangelical councils is seen in the fact that it fosters the perfection of love of God and love of neighbor in an outstanding manner, and that this profession is strengthened by vows. Furthermore, the hierarchy, following with docility the prompting of the Holy Spirit, accept the rules presented by an outstanding men and women and authentically approves these rules after further adjustments. It also aids by its vigilant and safeguarding authority those institutes variously established for the building up of Christ's body, in order that these same institutes may grow and flourish according to the spirit of the founders. So right here is the need for the church to regulate it, right? We have at times religious people, and they feel inspired. They're inspired in quotation marks, but they're inspired to do things that aren't right. Like, let's fast for all of Lent, and like no food at all, like water fast for all of Lent. Well, that's not something you should put in a rule for a religious community, because it's too likely to cause very, very serious issues, right? Or they have something and it's really abusing the conscience of the members, or things like that, right? And so those are the kind of ideas we need authority to oversee religious life, to make sure that like the kind of extremes in that the church doesn't approve those by accident, right? And that's what we need authority, right? Again, it talks about here how the vows are for the sake of charity, right? And here it talks about the hierarchy needs docility, the Holy Spirit needs to discern, needs to look, but then also needs to safeguard religious life, right? So I think I can look at my own community, the Church of Christ. In the last 15 years, it's really, starting about 2009, 2010, for about 8, 10 years, there was a whole bunch we were going through to try and change things that were not set up right in our community, right? And there were from big to little things. One of the things that I pointed out beforehand was the idea that before, for even the smallest change, we had to go to the general director in Rome. But that's fine when you have a small community, a few hundred, 100, 200 members. But we have 800 priests or so and a whole bunch of brothers and things like that. There's no way the general director can know everybody can make those decisions. So it ends up being this kind of bureaucracy making them instead of a person making them. Whereas now it's like, if I'm moving from this house to that house, it's now the superior here in the U.S. who makes that decision. And that was something that most communities start with just the general level making those. And we hadn't really transitioned from that as we grew, right? And that's something that the Vatican helped us to clarify, right? And things like that are why we need the church to do it. And I think the Legion is in a much better place because we were given that help by the church, right? We had a visitation. I talked to Archbishop Chaput for like an hour about my experience back in like 2009 or 10, sometime around then. And then we had a visitator go through different things in the Legion and such, right? So to make those changes, because I think we might be able to make the change ourselves, but having the church step in to help us out was a great help. So let's move on to 45B. That institutes can be overseen by a higher authority, even if before under a lower authority. There's kind of two ways this is going to happen. Let's talk about them after we read it. An institute of perfection and its individual members may be removed from the jurisdiction of the local ordinary by the Supreme Pontiff and subjected to him alone. This is done in virtue of his primacy over the entire church, in order to more fully provide for the necessity of the entire flock of the Lord in consideration of the common good. In like manner, these institutes may be left or committed to the charge of the proper patriarchal authority. The members of these institutes, in fulfilling their obligation to the church due to their particular form of life, ought to show reverence and obedience to bishops according to the sacred canons. The bishops are owed this respect because of their pastoral authority in their own churches and because of the need of unity and harmony in the apostolate. One thing here to note beforehand, as I'm reading it, is that this idea of institutes of perfection just means, any religious community or other kind of related things, or Society of Apostolic Life and secular institutes. We're not going to get into the details of the differences there, but any of those would be considered an institute of perfection. Now, the first way this is moved is that when a community starts, it starts to diocesan rights under the authority of the specific bishop, and so above the general superior is this bishop. But as the community grows and goes to more and more different dioceses and all over the world, it's often the practice where it will become a society, a community of pontifical rights. So the general superior is just under the Pope, right? So, like for us, that happened in, I think, I'm sure now my mind's going blank. I think it's February 6th, 1965. Might be a little off on that. If some Legion is listening, they're like, "Oh, you did it wrong." Well, you can email me. You all have my email if you're in the Legion, right? But I think that's it. And we celebrated when we were moved from a diocesan rite from Cuernavaca, I think it was, to the Diocese of Mexico, to being pontifical, to be all over the church under the Vatican, right? But then also the Pope can step in to resolve issues, even in a diocesan rite one, right? Because the Pope, in having this whole dicastery for religious life and things like that, has people who are much more expert. A little bishop in like a little diocese with a community of 10 members probably doesn't have the expertise to really help them if something's not working right? And they're not going to be biased. They're going to be more knowledgeable about religious life and more kind of detached from it. And this idea of sometimes there's visitations, right? Like there was a visitation for us, and things like that. And there's been visitations to the priesthood of St. Peter. That might still be going on. And it's not to say that these are bad. It's just say, hey, like, let's look at it and let's see if there's these issues and maybe help the issues, right? So there's 2 visitations of seminaries in the U.S. In the late 90s, and then I think in 2005 or 6. And the idea of these was to make sure that, they were teaching right and, different things like that. And there was an approach of homosexuality in the seminary. And the first one was like, hey, we really got to fix things. The second one was like, yeah, these things are generally fixed for a lot of those things, right? And that's a good thing, that through the help of the church, we have seminaries that are much better than they were beforehand. So let's move to 45C, profession and its value raised up by the church. The church not only raises the religious profession the dignity of a canonical state by approval, but even manifests that this profession is a state consecrated to God by the liturgical setting of that profession. The church itself, by the authority given to it by God, accepts the vows of the newly professed. It begs aid and grace from God for them by its public prayer. It commends them to God, imparts a spiritual blessing on them, and accompanies their self-offering by the Eucharistic sacrifice. Right? So here we talk about canonical state, and this means a legal state. So my legal status in the Catholic Church changed there, because canons here are canon law, church law, right? And private vows like this. You can make a private vow, hey, I'm going to pray the rosary every day with your spiritual director. That's ethical to do as long as your spiritual director approves it, things like that. But that's not backed up by the church. It doesn't change your state. You can even make private vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. But they aren't public vows. They aren't going to change your state, right? And so that they're not going to be in a different way, right? So, for example, part of it is the liturgy emphasizes this, right? So, in 2009, when I did my final vows, August 15, 2009, a bunch of leaders there, my family, a few other people around, and a few other families. And we prayed. I had to lie down on the floor and pray the Litany of Saints, and I did it as part of the liturgy right after the homily, and that is showing that sense. In this case, the provincial superior received my vows in the name of the church. Sometimes it's the bishop. Sometimes it's provincial. It just depends on the exact community and the circumstances. And the church wants us religious to persevere, right? That's the final thing. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast. You can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow, we're going to continue with the next paragraphs of Lumen Gentium, which are paragraphs 46 and 47 on the witness of religious, of priests and nuns, right? Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook or X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. There's also a SQPN Discord with a channel for Vatican II in a year at sqpn.com/Discord. And I usually go in there at least once a week or so to check if you want to post a question or you want to make a suggestion to make this podcast better.